Recording now, 3, 2, 1. This is Dean with the Two Party Podcast, and I'm on here with Patricia Moffat, and she's got a book that she authored. It's called She Turned Her Head Away, an Adoption Memoir. And it's on Amazon, which is where I'm looking at my other screen, and you can get it there. She's here to tell us a little bit about herself, tell us a little bit about her background, and then she's going to tell us about the book, and we'll dive into that a little bit later. So Patricia, go ahead. You have the floor.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you very much for having me on and being interested in my story. I hope that there are people out there listening who have connections to adoptions, whether they were adopted as kids like I was, or whether they've given children up to adoption as my birth mother did, or whether they have adopted children like my mom and dad did. So I grew up in Northern California in Ukiah. It was a nice little town. Being adopted wasn't such an unusual thing in our town. My brother and I were both adopted, and our best friends down the street were, and our cousins in faraway Washington, D.C. were also adopted. So it sort of seemed kind of normal.
Mm-hmm.
And all the time I was growing up, I had this shadow mother in my head who sometimes she was very encouraging and positive to me and would sing me lullabies to sleep when I was really little. And other times I was kind of afraid of her. Adopted children are usually told the story that they were chosen, that their parents really wanted them and picked them out from a whole room full of babies, and they were lucky. But you see, that shadow mother in my background and in my head had not chosen me. She'd chosen to give me away.
Right.
And so no matter how happy your childhood is or how close to your parents, there's still something very odd and negative at the beginning of your life. Now, this isn't to suggest that everybody who is adopted decides to go searching for birth mothers and fathers like I did. Some people just don't want to deal with it. But this book is the story of my life, what it was like for me being adopted, why I decided to search, the search itself, and finding my birth family. And all the years after that, 21 years I lived in a close relationship with my birth mother. And I was still very close to my adoptive family. People have written memoirs about adoption and searching. Yeah. But what's unusual about mine is that it continues for so long, until after both of my mothers have died, and gives me a chance to resolve questions and figure out what in the heck was going on in my life.
Right.
So I'm hoping that, you see, when I started searching in 1977, longer than you've been alive, maybe.
I was going to say that was a year after I was born. So I was born in 76.
Oh, well, my daughter was born in 76.
Yeah.
Anyway, there were not very many books at all written about searching, and it was just getting started. And I just ate up whatever I could find, which wasn't much. When you're thinking about searching or finding out who you are, who you came from, it really helps to have other people's experiences that you can learn about and compare to your own feelings and your experience. So I'm hoping that this book will speak to people who are in the position I was in 1976, thinking about searching what to do, and especially, will this hurt my adopted parents?
Right.
And how do I do that? You know, the memoirs that are out there I've read quite a few of them. A lot tend to be self-published, which is
Mm-hmm.
fine, but they don't go far enough so you see how the story all turned out. And they often give short shrift to the adoptive family.
Right.
Um, and in my case, that was a really difficult thing, was getting my adoptive mother to understand what I was doing and why.
Yeah. Yeah. And
So,
one of the things I think is interesting, and I have a lot of friends that have been through the adoption process, grew up, didn't know their whole parents. I had friends that their adoptive parents never told them they were adopted until they were like teenagers, and then that was the time to tell them. But it's very, the thing with adoption is it's very interesting how it impacts so many lives, because initially, obviously, the birth mother giving up the child for whatever reasons it may be. Obviously, her life is in a position where something's going on, and then the child themselves is put through this traumatic event. Sometimes you can consider it traumatic. Sometimes I've heard stories from friends that were adopted that they actually had a pretty good process and great parents that adopted them. And then there's always, again, there's the other side of the impact of lives, which is the adopted parents and how they're receiving a child and the way they raise a child. So we always hear the horror. I mean, everybody's always heard the horror stories of abusive homes and being brought back and forth through foster care or whatnot. But it's always been interesting to me because we kind of talked a little bit about it before the show, and we said we would talk a little bit more about it. Is from when I was growing up, we had in my house, originally it was me and my blood sister, Tiffany. I had a step brother and sister, Holly and Ken. And then we had several step siblings, as well as my mother, she was at the time stay at home. It was a very abusive, very, very dysfunctional situation when we were kids. But my mother loved kids. And so she had started adopting kids as much as she could. Every kid she could find in an abusive situation, every kid she could drag away from those situations. And there was one in particular that always stood out that to this day, I followed up, tried to get in touch with, but have not been able to really successfully communicate with her. And her name was Christy, and she was from a very abusive home. She was removed from the parents and put with her grandmother. At the time she was placed with her grandmother was abusive, sexually as well as physically to her, and emotionally. And that's how my mom ended up coming about getting Christy in our home. And this girl was I think I was about 5, honestly, at the time. I was maybe about 4 or 5. And Christy was older than me. I think she was maybe 6 or 7, if I remember correctly. But I just remember, I remember her vividly playing with her all the time. But I remember vividly that she was also always in trouble because of her trauma. She expressed it onto others. And so her trauma, her sexual abuse, she would put off to my brothers and sisters. She was very mean, to the point of, it was almost like a little, crazy little kid, children of the corn almost at times, because she was very, very deviant. And but my mother and all of us loved her very much. When she got to our home, we took her in, we cared for her. We knew there was problems. Even at my young age, I knew my mom had that discussion with all of us that, she's coming from a broken home. We all got to just love her as much as we can. And we did. And it finally came to the point where her grandmother, my mother and father started going through the process of divorce. And so the grandmother decided that she was losing money by not having the child in her home. And amongst my mother and father divorcing, the grandmother decides she wants the kid back because she wants to have a paycheck. And unfortunately, the state sided with her. And so she was removed from our home. And I have followed up, like I was first going off talking about, is like how this affects lives. I have followed through and kind of looked for Christy over the years. And I did find her down and I believe she's still in Miami, Florida. And the last time I looked, she was in prison. And and when I look through the records, I see, I look up her name and I look up the records, and I just see a long history where you can tell her life spiraled out of control the same way it did as she was young, because she has lots of drug charges, lots of obvious addiction and stuff like that, but other things that were just went down a path that was almost reflective of her childhood. Almost the trauma just led into her adult life.
Yeah, it sounds like the acting out that she did was more because of her original family than it was because of your parents. They must have been fostering her rather than adopting her.
Yeah, at the time, that's we took her in for fostering as I believe at the time my mom stepped in as a protective parent is what they called it at the time. So she was basically removing her from a dangerous situation. And that was kind of how we ended up with custody of her.
You know, I've heard it often said by social workers and whatnot that children who are adopted tend to act out in two main ways. Some of them, like myself, were goody-goody and always having to earn their parents' love, trying to be at the top of the class all the time and best in everything. It's very stressful to have to do that. But
it's almost having an extra weight put on you.
Yeah, you come across as the good adoptee. And then the other side of the coin is kids who just are so angry.
Yes.
And act out and become delinquent. And, you know, there are many more proportionally adopted kids in juvenile delinquent places than there are anybody else. And my brother was a bit that way. He got into drugs and he, you know, I never did, not until I left home at all. You know, he was the experimenter, and he started smoking, and, you know, he really upset my parents with, you know, growing marijuana and stuff. I shouldn't, that's legal now, but at the time it was.
Yeah, it's funny how that's all gone in full circle.
Yeah, but it sounds like you're, yeah. So, you see, compared to what you've described, I had an idyllic childhood. My parents were middle class. We lived in this small town. My dad was a teacher and a school administrator, and my mom was a psychologist. And I think what's interesting, I've had friends say to me who are also adopted and who've read my book, the really interesting thing is that you had all that. You had the ideal childhood, and still you had to search for your birth mother.
Right.
And you see, it really hit me three times in my life, where my birth mother was very much present to me. And one time, the first time was when I had to have an abortion when I was 24, before I was married. And I'm telling you, I felt like I was reliving my mother's trauma. I began to really empathize with what she must have gone through, because when I was born, people didn't have abortions.
Right.
It was either have this child and raise it, or have this child
and adopt out.
Adopt out. So I was at the beginning of what they call the baby scoop era, which is just post World War II, 1945 through 1973, when Roe v. Wade came in,
right,
which led to abortion. So during all that time, in the baby scoop era, the story was closed adoption, secrecy. The original birth certificates were hidden, locked away.
I was going to say hidden or destroyed.
Impossible.
I know quite a few older adopted people that I'm friends with, and they have said they have no records. They can't even get their records of their birth certificates.
Yeah, that's true. Shall we pop into the search for a minute, and I'll tell you about that, or should we stick?
Yeah, let's go ahead.
Well, let me just finish. The abortion really took me back. And then when my kids were born, I have two children, a boy and a girl. They were born in 74 and 6. I just could not imagine how anybody could give a baby away. I mean, I was so attached to my kids from the word go. And so that started me thinking, and also having no medical history at all.
Right.
When I was in labor with my daughter, a medical technician came in and started asking me all these questions about my family medical history, and I didn't know anything.
Right.
And that made me feel quite nervous.
Oh yeah, of course.
So anyway, it wasn't long after my daughter was born that I started thinking really seriously about doing this. And uh-oh. Are you there? Yeah, sorry, my screen just went blank.
Oh, you're okay. Yeah, I can still hear you.
Yeah. Okay. So there were a couple of organizations then in 1976. There was Parent Finders. I think that may be just a Canadian organization, but there was Alma in the States and Orphan Voyage States. So I hooked in with them. By the way, I forgot to say that I moved to Toronto in 1971 from California. Okay. Got married here, and I'm still here.
Yeah.
So when I got started searching, you mentioned this fellow who said there was no information available.
Yeah, he had
that wasn't quite true.
Yeah, he had a very difficult time, and every time he would step to, once he was older and he knew who his birth parents were, he found out all the information of where he was born. He found out, what hospital he was in, and all this stuff, and then where the adoption had taken place. And he tried on his own effort.
Well, how did he find it?
What's that?
How did he find all that out? Only when he met his birth parents. You see, those are clues that you would use to find your birth parents.
Yeah, he
found the hospital you were born in.
Yeah, his adoptive parents were apparently they were at one point they were good friends with his actual birth parents, and I guess they had kind of gone down a road that wasn't good, and he ended up in the system and up for adoption, and they stepped in and took him, knowing that he was born, knowing that his parents were not on a good path. And so he was fortunate, one of the fortunate ones that was able to have some kind of a history that he had knowledge of. And so once he got that information from his adoptive parents, of his birth parents, once he got in contact with them, he got more detailed information. But what was really crazy is it was like, almost just like you said, is his birth parents were like, it was very hush hush. They were from a very good, both of them come from very good back middle class families, and neither family wanted the other. That was very young. They were under 18. They were probably like 16, 17 when the girl got pregnant. And so neither one wanted their families smeared as being, these parents that were young and unresponsible. And so it basically became a hush hush thing. So when they finally adopted out with the agency and he looked into it, there was no records of the agency had no records of his adoption. The hospital had no records of his actual birth. And so all of these things were just not there in the records. So he went to the city he was born. He went to the clerk's office, started searching all the microfiche records and all the stuff that they had already transferred into electronic, and he got nowhere. He could find his birth parents. He could find all kinds of info on their families on both sides, but he could not find anything about a child being born. And so when he got older, I think it was his father that said that there was both families brought attorneys in, and they're pretty sure that the attorneys made some moves that made all this stuff disappear. And so it was really a real hush hush situation. And I'm assuming that his parents were probably very well to do or well known is why they did it that way.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's very unusual, because normally these things go, or did, through an adoption agent. Social workers are the ones that match the parents up and all of that, at least especially in that baby scoop era. That people talk about the adoption triad, the adoptee, the birth parent, the adoptive parent, but there's also a fourth leg on this, workers who had a big part to play in, really convincing all these girls to give up their babies to adoption.
Yeah.
And then, choosing the parents that the baby would go to. And, I mean, I can't imagine playing God to that extent, the way
It's just
social
thinking about
workers
it the
did.
way you just explained it is just being a young mother who's having to choose a place to take your kid or hand your kid off. I just couldn't even imagine the pain or the emotions that a woman would have to go through to even deal with that.
Well, the country was full of these homes for unwed mothers during that period.
Yep.
And some of them were nice places and some of them were awful.
Yeah. Yep.
And the girls were, you can imagine having a baby and your hormones are tearing around and they're easily manipulated.
Right.
They look to the social worker for advice. Now, my birth mother position, she was 24 and unmarried when she got pregnant with me. And it was right at the end of the war. So she wore a wedding band and pretended that her husband was still overseas.
Right.
And continued working. She worked until she started to show, and then she was a waitress. So she didn't go to one of those maternity homes. And the social workers who interviewed her at the adoption agency when she turned up said that she was very well-spoken and confident, and she knew this is what she needed to do. She wasn't panicked or in tears about it.
Right.
So in that respect, my mother was a bit out of the norm. Because normally you think, oh, 15, 16-year-old kids giving up babies.
That would be a
anyway,
huge
back to
emotional
the
impact.
searching. Yeah, that they never get over.
Yeah.
I
would imagine that's a lifelong trauma. I mean, that's something you're going to relive in your head.
Yeah.
Did I do the right thing? Did I not do the right thing? Why did I do that? I mean, to me, it seems like that would put not just the trauma of it, but the guilt. As a mother giving up a child, I'm sure there's just such a heavy burden of guilt.
Well, yes, and my mother went on to have 3 other children when she was married, and I think she felt it then more. I think she blocked it out when she was actually going through it. We did talk quite a lot about this.
Yeah.
But you never get over it. And the other thing that was interesting, when I was a kid, see, I was born in San Francisco.
Yeah.
But grew up in Ukiah, this little town in Northern California. So whenever we went to San Francisco, I was always searching looking for somebody who looked like my mother, my birth mother. And I found out that she did the same thing. Whenever she went to San Francisco, she was actually, she would look at children that would be the age that I was. And she went through the same trauma.
Yeah.
So anyway, the search. I was very fortunate in that I knew my mother's name. I knew her last name because somebody had, by mistake, written baby Metcalf on a form that the adoption agency gave to my parents. The handwriting was a scrawl, and my whole life I thought the name was Mel Cody. But when I really started to get serious about searching, I studied it really carefully, and a friend did the same, and my husband at the time did the same, and we all came up with the name Metcalf. So that was a huge boost.
Yeah.
Most people have no idea, at least from the closed system.
Yep.
Have no idea what their birth names were. And on my amended birth certificate, which is the fiction, the name of the doctor who delivered me. They couldn't fudge that. So I used that. And in California at that time, probably now still, you can get you can write off to the state capitol in Sacramento and ask for non-identifying information about your birth parents.
Mm-hmm.
And so some clerk goes through all these files and writes down your mother's interests, education level, all this stuff, and the same about your father. So from that, I learned, so I had the name Metcalf. Then I learned that she came from a family where she had two sisters and two brothers.
Mm-hmm.
That's enormously helpful right there,
Yeah.
because there are city directories that you can go through. They must be on microfilm on the internet now, but I had a friend in Seattle, a former roommate. She and I worked together on this. Me in San Francisco, and she on the spot there. And we were able to track my mother when she left Seattle, when she went to California, had me, went back. So without that, it would have been extremely hard.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
But
Without
actually,
having some information, it would be extremely difficult, I would assume, to even, and for a lot of adoptees, they don't get to, they don't get that information. And especially if it's coming from, I know a lot that have been through from traumatic homes, they don't get a lot of that information for safety reasons. Social workers they protect that until they're adults, and then they start looking into it because the father or mother could be a danger to the child or whatnot. And I know that's been a couple of my friends discussed that, is like they can't get any records until they're adults when we were younger, because of the danger and the safety factor. And then some of the juvenile records were locked away to where they had to get attorneys to actually kind of go through and fight to unseal things to even get information.
The other thing is that in the States especially, it's so difficult because the rules are different in different states.
Every state is totally different.
Yeah, almost everyone. I mean, some of them now have completely open records.
Yep.
But some of them still don't.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the luck of the draw where you are.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, like, I grew up from till I was 5, I was in Florida. Then from about 5 to 15, after my mother and father got divorced, I was in Oregon and Washington and California area. And then we were back to Florida from the time I was about 15 till up until recently, 6 years ago. I've been on and off in Florida. So it's kind of like, I know Florida, it's, if you know how to search and you know where to search, you can get a lot of information in Florida. Oregon was one of those where it was almost impossible to get juvenile records, because when I got older, I had to get a bunch of my juvenile records, and it was virtually impossible to get juvenile records. So once they seal juvenile records, they're gone. And I mean, they have them, but it's really, you got to have an attorney or somebody that's well-to-do in the court that we will be able to get someone convinced to judge to give you access to these records.
Well, that's very similar to the adoption records.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what? Today, we short circuit all this bureaucracy with the DNA companies.
Yes.
It's quite astonishing what you can find. I joined ancestry.com and 23andMe.
Yeah.
See, I haven't found my father yet, but I was able and finding relatives from my father's family.
Mm-hmm.
I've stopped doing that at the moment. I'm busy talking about this book, and besides, my father never even knew that my mother was pregnant.
Yeah, and I've heard that a lot as well. I've heard a lot of adoptees say the same thing. They're like, I couldn't even figure out who my father was because he didn't even know.
Yeah, he didn't know. But I know, I know who he is. I know his name. I know that he died very young, and I know that I have half siblings.
Yeah.
Out there. So. But those DNA companies and what they can turn up are just amazing. It must be people who are searching a great deal, because sometimes I felt, with this old-fashioned detective sleuthing with my friends, and waiting for the mail to come with a piece of paper I'd been waiting for. I just felt it was hopeless. It was like walking through molasses.
Mm-hmm.
And today, my gosh, you hit a key and you find out names, and
it's such a great
so
it's such a great thing that you can type something in the internet and find so many answers, and then at the same time it's a little bit scary, because it's kind of like, well, if I can get this information, the wrong person can also get this information. But it is great that we have these tools at our disposal now. It's funny that you mentioned that, about the ancestry stuff, because I started doing that. My mom started doing that a ways back. On my dad's side, we know. I mean, obviously, I know who my father is, but nobody knows at all. Nobody at all. And my father, since he was murdered back in 2008, but nobody in our family knows who his dad was. Nobody has ever determined or told us. He knew, and his mother knew, and nobody else. And they would not share. His mother would not share with anybody, and he never spoke of his father. And so he only met him several times, and that was it. But there has never been anyone in our family that can identify who my grandfather is.
That's, I think that's very disturbing to the kids who come after, to you.
Yeah.
My son really wants me to find out a lot more about my father. He wants to know who his grandfather is.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, that was always kind of my thing, was like, who is my grandfather? Was he, my dad took a bad path in life. And so it was like, is my grandfather similar to my dad in the nature that he took on, or is my grandfather a good man? Or how many grandkids did he have? How many other relatives do we have in that extended part of the family? Because the majority of my family's gone. A lot of my mother's side and most all of my father's side now is gone. So it's literally like, I have my son and me and my wife and our immediate family, and her family. But as far as my side of the family, I don't really have a lot of relatives alive anymore. And so it's always been like, I wonder who he is. I wonder who his descendants were. Like, who do we have that's still alive in the United States or wherever, that is related to us, whether it's cousins or whatever. And so we've never been able to get those answers, because nobody can identify. Even if you go through like the ancestry and stuff like that, there's no records identifying who my father or my grandfather is. Nobody knows. There's conflicting stories of what even his first name is.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's one of those, like, it's like we probably will never know, but for all we know, we're bumping into cousins and relatives all the time, and we don't know it sometimes.
Well, the DNA testing can tell you that, as long as you're all getting tested.
Yeah.
I must say, for me, I have so many cousins in my birth family and in my adoptive family. It's been, I just met a cousin I like very much just a year ago in Portland.
Yeah.
And she is my birth mother's cousin's daughter, and we've really hit it off. And even now, all those years after, 44 years after I found my mother, I'm still discovering family. I want to say something about my adoptive mother. It was very, very hard for her when I searched, and she put on a brave face to begin with. But you see, she said to me, back then when we adopted you, we were told that this was our child, as if we'd given birth.
Right.
And there was no way that the other mother was going to ever come into our life and disrupt our family.
Right.
And we believed that. My mother herself was a psychologist and a social worker, so she believed this 100%.
Yeah, and I think a lot of adoptive parents do believe that. They believe that they're getting a child that they can raise as their own.
That's not so true anymore. There's a lot more open adoption now. I don't think such a thing existed when I was a kid, except in families where you mentioned a case like that, where people adopt each other's brother and sister's kids. But but open adoption today, it must be so much easier on the kids. There's a 2 doors down the street, they're friends of ours whose son and daughter adopted a little girl. She's 5 or 6 now. And once a year, they get together with the birth parents, both families, the adoptive family and the birth parents. And so that child doesn't have any of these questions that I had growing up. Doesn't question, do I look like my birth mother? Why did she give me up? You know, all of this, it's all out in the open.
Yeah.
I married on a family in Lethbridge, Alberta, about 15 years ago, I guess. And that was the most open adoption you can imagine. The long weekend that I was there, they had both of their children's birth mothers there staying in the house. And everybody was together, and the kids were perfectly, happy and adjusted to this. And I said to the girl, mother was 3, and she brought me this scrapbook photo book to show me of her family. And she said, there's mommy and daddy the day that I was born, and here are her parents holding her. And then there's a picture of her birth mother. And she showed me, and I said, so who is that? And I didn't know whether she'd say my mother. She said, that's my Fran. That was her name, Fran.
Yeah.
Oh, that's my Fran. It was just so easy.
Yeah.
So I often wonder what happened to those kids.
Yeah.
If they, turned out as well as they seemed that they would.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting, like how we always hear about the story, like we were talking about earlier. You always hear about the story of whether you're an adoptive parent and you want to let the child know they're adopted or not. And it is how it kind of used to be. And so it does make you wonder how that outcome plays out. So if you do tell them that they're adopted and they know their whole lives, are they more well adjusted to the situation? Or if you hide it?
I think so.
I would agree.
No, I think it's much better to tell the kids.
I agree. I think being more open with and honest in communication with not just your child, but an adopted child, I think is just key. I mean, you don't want to have a relationship that 15 years later, or say 18 years later, the dynamic of that relationship changes because it almost seems like a lie. Like somebody, you're trying to tell them something at an older age.
Yeah.
And you're basically telling them that, hey, I'm sorry, I've lied, or it's not that you've lied, but you've withheld important information from them their whole life. And I think that role really changes the dynamic of that relationship you would have with that person.
Well, that's why the social workers always told adoptive parents during the scoop era to tell the child the truth and as early as possible. See, I do not remember when my parents first told me I was adopted. It was just a given.
Right.
I do know someone that his parents adopted him after they died. That he and his brother were adopted, and their family was a natural child. He was totally shocked.
Right.
And I was shocked. It makes you just live life, and your life is built on a lie.
Yeah, and that's you already got a child who's going through an early issues of potential trauma and whatnot. But then you're also, to me, you're kind of presenting more drama. You're presenting more of a problem for this child to have success by basically setting them up for an emotional failure later.
Yeah. Yeah.
So tell us a little.
Another thing that's.
Go ahead.
Ask me. I was just going to say another thing that's difficult for adopted children is not to have your own family tree, the adoptive family. I remember many discussions with my parents and my aunts and uncles about, grandpa and great grandpa and how they came in a covered wagon,
Mm-hmm.
from Massachusetts and all that, and I would be sitting there going, well, that's interesting, but it doesn't have anything to do with me.
Yeah,
Who were my
that's not
parents?
my story.
Where did I come?
Yeah, that's not my story and my
Yeah,
history. Yeah.
yeah,
That's very, very
that's
interesting.
right.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit. Let's tell the audience a little bit about what, obviously we've heard about your story and kind of the things you've grown up and kind of dealt with, but tell us a little bit about the book. Tell us what the audience can expect when they read the book and what you were trying to convey in the book.
I don't know if you're
Yep. I can
I
I
don't know
can
if
see
your
it.
audience is going to be able to
Yep, I can see
see
the
this.
book, and what I'll
The
do
book.
when we put the episode up, I will put the picture of the book up as well.
Okay. Okay. Um, okay. So the book is really in several parts. It's growing up adopted. It's the urge to search. What led me to that?
Mm-hmm.
The search itself. Uh, the reunion with my birth family members. Just an emotional time. It was an incredible long weekend that I spent in Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, what did it all mean? Years later, how did it all turn out? Who was my mother, really?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and how did my mothers deal with it until the end of their lives? So the book goes beyond their deaths.
Right.
And the book actually, in my mind, the story of how the garden is almost as interesting as the book,
Mm-hmm.
because it's one of these stories about, oh yes, this manuscript has been sitting in my closet for years. Well, in this case, 43 years.
Mm-hmm.
Only what happened was I wrote the book in different time periods. So the first draft I wrote right after I found my birth family,
Mm-hmm.
that fall of 1977. And I went so far as to get a New York agent
Mm-hmm.
who read the book and liked it a lot and tried to shop it around. But then she died. So
Mm-hmm.
I left the book alone. I couldn't deal with it.
Yeah.
Then I took it up again 2 or 3 different times. Um, and I was belonged to a little writing group in Toronto, and that's when it really took off. I took all the material and put more in. I'm a fanatic journal writer.
Mm-hmm.
So people say to me, but how did you remember all that dialogue? Well,
You
it's
kept record
pretty
of it.
simple, really. The reason is I, after I talked to my birth mother for the first time and the second time, as soon as we hung up, I just wrote everything down
Mm-hmm.
so that when I went back to it, it was just as fresh.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you
Um,
mentioned about this being, a 43-year journey of basically writing and memoir.
mhm.
And so what's interesting about that is obviously your life has changed different avenues throughout 43 years. So we're actually getting to see, I guess, your perspective on all of this from different parts and different positions in your life where you were on your journey in life. So I think that's to me, that
That,
stands out as very interesting that we get to see from how your mind state was from the period of when you met your birth mother to the time period of, like you said,
yeah.
after her dying, you're still bringing a message and a perspective. And I think that's very interesting.
The really interesting thing about a memoir like this, that is a lifelong memoir,
Mm-hmm.
is that when you go back on it, you meet your earlier selves
Yes.
and you enter the mind state of that child
Mm-hmm.
or that all over again.
Mm-hmm.
I think memoir, whether you get it published or not, is a wonderful thing to do when you're evaluating your life. I mean, I'm at the age now for me to think about my life as a whole. What have I done?
Mm-hmm.
And memoir, I think everybody has a memoir in them. everybody has an interesting story to tell. They may be very different. I mean, what you've said about your life
Mm-hmm.
is so interesting. And a lot of people could relate to your experiences. So, yes, there's that about memoir writing that is very instructive. You learn a lot.
Are you thinking
I
about,
haven't said
or
too much about.
are you thinking about or possibly pondering writing, or have you already started writing another book?
I've got a couple of ideas going. I've got, um, I started a fictional thing about my grandfather's life,
Mm-hmm.
but that didn't really go anywhere. I'm still writing journals. I suspect someday I'll write another memoir.
Right.
Some
Yeah.
people can just go on writing memoirs.
Yeah.
I also work with my husband who has written 4 popular books. So we work together. And
Very
when
good.
you're working on a book on black holes, it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of hard to start a novel,
Yeah.
although I would like to.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
But
It's
just the reunion, just want to
yeah.
say, if there are people listening to this who are going, oh, should I try to find my birth family? I just would say, don't give up.
Mm-hmm.
It is scary. You don't know what you're going to find. You don't know whether your mother's going to reject you again or welcome you. You
Yeah.
don't know until you try it. And I was just incredibly lucky to find a whole birth family that welcomed me.
Right.
And they were so kind, interested, and to be in a room of people, most of whom I was related to by blood, is for me never to have seen anyone I was related to by blood
Right.
until I had my children was just an incredible experience, and it still is. I'm still close to my birth sisters
Mm-hmm.
as I am to my adoptive brother.
Yeah.
Um, but go for it. If this is the core issue in your life, go for it. Search.
Yeah.
That's what I would say to anybody who's worried.
Yeah, and we talk a lot on the show, Two Party Podcast. We talk a lot about mental health. We talk a lot about, self-care, taking care of yourself. I remember again another friend of mine that I just remembered the situation where when I was younger, we were having a conversation. He ran away from home. He came over to my mom's house. All the kids that ran away from home always showed up at my mom's house because they knew my mom cared, and she knew that they all knew they could come to our house and they would get fed. They get if they needed a place to stay. She would contact their parents, let them know they didn't run away. They're here. They're with me. And so there was always that safety net with my mom. She was always just there for all my friends. But I do remember one of my friends running away one time, and he was adopted. And I remember him breaking down and crying, and he just felt worthless. He just felt like, my original parents just threw me away, and I'm stuck with these parents I don't like. And so we had this whole conversation where he just
Yeah,
had a meltdown. And my mom stepped in the room at that point. She
yeah,
had just got off work, and so she kind of came into the conversation. We had this whole discussion, and again, we talk a lot on the show about mental health. We talk a lot about anxiety, stress, suicide, all kinds of just different issues, because I'm a very, very big advocate on self-reflection. I'm a very big advocate on self-improvement. But my biggest thing is that I suffer from mental things and traumas from my childhood that I am still coping with.
mm,
And so that's why I like to use the show as a
yeah,
platform and to promote mental health awareness. But one of the things that I wanted to touch on that just, like I said, just came to mind is that instance where this kid just felt like he was nobody. He felt that, his original parents just tossed him away like trash. And I think it's important, especially coming from you and your book and your memoir, and what I'm hearing just having this conversation with you, I think it's important that we leave on a note that the audience understands that is not the case. That is not a valid, no matter what the situation of your birth parents giving you up or surrendering you to adoption or foster care or losing custody of you even. I think it's important that we we know, and we encourage people to understand that at no point is any human life not valuable, and that we should never take these opinions or these feelings or emotions, or maybe this bad thinking of what the world may be telling us, or how our environment may be telling us that we're not worth anything because we're adopted or we were fostered out. I think it's important that we touch on that a little bit, because it seems to me, and I'm just putting myself in the shoes of somebody who I related to, who broke down in that moment when I was younger, feeling what he was going through. And I just feel that that can lead to so much harm already, just that feeling, that emotional abandonment, and then feeling like you're worthless.
Yeah.
And then that can lead down to the roads of, like we discussed earlier, addiction. That can lead to suicide. That can lead to poor decisions. But at the end of the day, I think that we need to we want people to understand that you can't validate feelings that are untrue, and it's not there. At no point is there a human life that's not valuable.
Absolutely. And a lot of the things that adopted kids worry about, like I'm useless, they threw me away, turn out just not to be true.
Right.
That when you search and you discover that there were impossible circumstances in this young woman's life.
Yeah.
It wasn't because she didn't love you or want to keep you. It's very healthy to find out the truth.
Yeah. And
even
I think
if the truth is not so good,
I think
it's still better.
Yeah. And I think it's important sometimes for the child to know that, like you said, the circumstances may have happened that put them in this situation. However, they'll find out really quickly that it wasn't that they didn't want the child. It was that the circumstances did not allow for them to be able to give them a healthy, proper upbringing and in a safe environment. And sometimes that can be it.
And you see, in my mother's case, she would have been a single mother. In 1945, that just wasn't done.
Yeah.
She would have been ostracized.
Yep.
Or she could have given me to her parents who lived on a farm on Whidbey Island, but I don't know. I think she did the right thing, quite honestly.
Yeah.
She gave me to parents who really, really wanted a child, who were so positive. I was going to say about the self-esteem thing, adoptive parents have a huge role to play in helping with those self-esteem problems, because it does help to hear that you were chosen.
Yeah.
You weren't just thrown away, you were also chosen.
Yep.
And life is not black or white. So yeah, well, my adoptive brother has some problems. He has PTSD. And I've been wondering whether it might be due just to the trauma of being adopted. Yeah. There's an author and psychotherapist, Nancy Verrier. She writes a lot about the trauma of the child who's given up, the child that is taken from their mother. Back in 1945, most people just thought, okay, babies just need to be fed and cared for, but it's actually much deeper than that.
Yeah.
There's the bond with the mother that is suddenly broken. You're just gone, and babies somewhere in their cells remember that.
Yeah, they get detached.
So it's very healing to go back. Go back to your original mother and find out what happened, and give her a hug.
Yeah, and I would 100% agree. I know there's lots of research out there that shows that the initial bond between birth and a certain period, basically the first year of life for a child, is one of the most nurturing and one of the most important time periods for any human. I mean, it's literally, and when that bond is broken, and that baby is not given an opportunity to have that loving, caring, nurturing from their mother, that there's been research that proves that it causes issues. It causes detachment. It causes children to behave differently as they grow older and progress because of that bond not being there. And like you said, it is in their mind, so even subconsciously, to the point where they know there was a detachment, there's an inside feeling that bond was never there. And I agree with you wholeheartedly that I would encourage anybody who doesn't know who their birth parents are, or has a lot of questions as to why and what, to reach out, try to find them. You obviously don't want to be, nobody wants to be the aggressor of a situation. They may have a whole different life, and but at the end of the day, it does not hurt to reach out and just say, hey, look, I'm here if you want to talk, or I'm here, I have some questions if you're available to talk. You obviously don't want to go, find out who your parents are, kick the front door in and say, here I am, what happened? That wouldn't be the right way to handle things. But, no. I do encourage it, like you do. I think it's very important to know the circumstances, understand, before putting yourself through that emotional journey to meet them, to understand that they do now have a separate life. You need to understand and be compassionate to where they are now in life. And then be receptive to where they were at the time of the adoption.
Yes. Another thing is, it can happen that people search and find that their birth mother has died.
Yes. Yeah.
But that can also be a healing experience. I have a friend in Toronto who had that experience. Her mother had died quite young. But she was able to meet all sorts of relatives in the family, and is very close to her half brother now.
Yeah. And I would think that would bring some kind of
it's
closure.
Just made her feel much better about herself, knowing. Yeah.
Yep. That's very interesting. And I think that, at the end of the day, I would want to, if my mother adopted me and I found out who she was and then found out she passed away, I think that would be a pertinent closure for me. I think, then I may still have some questions. There may still be unanswered things that I could not get from her mouth, but I do believe that it would give me some kind of closure of knowing that she's not just out there and I don't have to continue searching.
Yes, exactly. And always wondering, where she is.
Yep.
So.
Well, it's been great having you on here, Patricia. And once, real quick, tell us again the name of the book and where we can find it.
Okay. The book is She Turned Her Head Away, and it's on Amazon. Or it can be ordered from the publisher, Crow's Nest.
Okay.
I just wanted to say something about the title.
Yep.
She Turned Her Head Away. By the way, I have a dedicated email set up. If anybody wants to just chat with me, it's She Turned Her Head Away @gmail.com.
Okay.
The title refers to my birth mother. The moment I was born, a nurse held me up and said, "Here's your beautiful baby girl." And she just turned her head away because she couldn't stand to look at me because she was giving me up. So that's what she saw, that one look, and then she turned her head away. But as I finished the book, read the drafts, I realized it wasn't just about my birth mother. It was my adoptive mother as well. When she had a hysterectomy at 25 and was unable to have children, then was able to adopt me, she turned her head away from my past and my brother's past. And it was just full steam ahead on parenthood, and this is my child.
Yep.
And I can even go so far as to say that I myself turned my head away from the importance of adoption in my life until after I had my own kids. I tried to pretend that it wasn't such a big deal, that it was just I downplayed things. emotions mostly that would come up that I didn't understand.
Yeah.
So I was doing the same thing. So don't forget the name of the book. She turned her head away.
Yep, for sure. We will when we get this all up and edited and ready to post this episode and air it, we will have the picture of the book so that the audience can be familiar with what the cover looks like, as well as the title. And then we'll, in the description, we will also put that in there.
Good.
Is there anything else you want to bring up or mention to
The publisher, I think we've covered quite a lot of territory. It's been wonderful talking to you.
For sure.
I
For sure.
appreciate your input into the discussion,
Yeah.
not just asking questions.
I appreciate you. I appreciate
it's been a real conversation.
Yeah, and I appreciate you opening up and telling us your story and being vulnerable. Sometimes it's not easy for people to actually, be able to speak up about their personal their journey, and so I appreciate you coming on here and really letting the audience know who you are deeply and your past, and being able to talk about that.
Well, I have twin grandsons who are 20, and one of them said to me, they've been reading the book. He said, "Grandma, you said all these personal things. How does it make you feel that you've written all these personal things?" And you know what? If you write a memoir that is boring down into the emotions of things in your life, it's got to be personal. You have to get over it.
Yeah.
So, but it is hard in the beginning, and you're an empathetic interviewer. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I try. I hear that a lot. I really try to, because the thing that I enjoy, not just having my guests on, but I enjoy bringing the guests to the audience. But I think one of the things that, and I've touched a little bit on each episode. I kind of get a little bit into my background, but not a whole lot. But it's coming. There's going to be an episode where I need to dive in a little deeper on some of my history. But I think that's part of what maybe I'm able to kind of link and communicate with people in a certain way. My wife even kind of says the same thing. I just have this nature about me because I've been through so much in my life, traumatic. I've been through addiction. I've been through alcoholism. I've been through all these different avenues that I should have probably never traveled, but I did. I was always that guy. If you told me it couldn't be done, I had to show you how you could do it the best way. And unfortunately, that took me down a lot of bad roads. But at the end of the day, I think I'm able to communicate with people better because I have experienced certain things. But a lot of, hearing your story, what touches me is a little bit of what I know I grew up through and with. So I can relate to it. And I think a lot of the guests I have on, whether I dive into my background at all, even in the interviews, is I think that they sometimes don't realize, and some do, that I'm 100% able to empathize with a lot of these situations, especially when it comes to abuse and a lot of emotional stuff. I've been in counseling probably, I know, over 18 years of my life. I've went through counseling from a child up, and really witnessed some really horrific stuff in my life, which I've fortunately, my mom was good enough to get me into counseling so that I was able to learn some good tools to cope, which is probably why I now push for a lot of mental health awareness and things, because it helped me get past these difficult choices I was making and bad choices I was making. And it helped me now I'll be 45 in February. So it's made me now at 45 to be able to offer some advice to people, whether they take it or not is their choice. But also just to give this, an opportunity to use Two Party Podcast as a platform to hopefully help one person, and that's my biggest journey right now in my life is I want to be able to give back. And it is about what my legacy is, but not in a lifelong legacy. I'm looking at my legacy each day. What can I do each day to impact somebody versus what is my life as a whole? And that's where nowadays I focus on today. How many people can I help or impact today versus how many people, if I were to focus on how many I can in my life, I'm going to have good days and bad days. But if I take each day and I say, today I'm going to go, when I go get gas in my truck at the store, I'm going to smile, compliment, or say hi or hold a door for somebody. And to me, that can take one person out of who they are. They could be in a domestic abusive relationship. They could be going through bankruptcy, divorce, whatever it may be. And just that one moment where I'm able to connect with them, even if it's just at a gas station, even if it's just holding a door, even if it's just offering a smile, those are the things nowadays to me that are important. And so that's the legacy each
That's
day.
a wonderful goal.
Yep. And I think the world needs more of that, you know, and that's kind of why I promote that, is because I really feel that through me helping one person out there, I pray that it's able to help someone else.
You're breaking up. It's getting hard to hear you.
Are you there still?
What I hope for my book too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and close out.
Touched by what I've written, and
yeah.
that it will, help them with their own decisions and lives.
Yeah.
We're starting to break up though.
Yeah, it is. It's getting the audio is getting pretty broken up. So I'm going to go ahead and say goodbye. Again, thank you for coming on. I hope to have you on in the future.
I think
You have a great day.